Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. So here we are, part 4. We've been digging deeply into our contract that you should be looking at right now, the RPA, and we're going to look at where we left off. So the first one we're going to talk about is the loan contingency. It's pretty straightforward with the loan contingency. One of the things that I've been noticing recently is there's been some pushback either from our agent to the listing agent when we're working as buyer's agent, or vice versa, buyer's agent against us as listing agent when it comes to the removal of the loan contingency. So the issue being that for some reason, agents are under the impression that I don't have to remove the loan contingency until I have full loan approval. And that's not true. That's not how it works. You may want that to be the case, that you are completely satisfied that there's nothing that could happen to that loan, but that's not how it works. The amount of time that is listed right here is the amount of time you have. So you have 3 choices if you're not comfortable with where your buyer stands with their loan when you get to this time period. So your choice number 1 is remove the contingency and move forward. Choice number 2 is cancel and walk away from the deal because you're not comfortable removing the contingency. Or the final one is request an extension. But there's nothing that requires me to give you an extension as the listing agent or seller. There's nothing that requires me to extend that contingency period. You had the amount of time you had. What you're to do as agent and buyer is to get you to a place where you feel comfortable and confident that the loan will be approved 100%. And by day 17, in most cases, at the very least, you should have a conditional approval. And if you have a conditional approval and those conditions are normal conditions that your lender isn't worried about obtaining, then you shouldn't have an issue removing that contingency. Now, I'm going to say that most lenders, I won't say never, but most lenders are not going to say, yeah, remove that contingency, we're good, unless they're like super confident that they've got everything in and they've got full approval. That's fine. But this goes back to something that we had talked about, I think in class number 1 or 2, when we were talking about financing, is we as buyer's agents jump the gun with our buyers. What happens is that we're so excited that we have a buyer that wants to do something and they seem like they qualify. So we just, as soon as we get everything to the lender and the lender's kind of like, yeah, I think that they should be able to, or sometimes, I've heard of buyer's agents call the lender and say, hey, look, this is how much they make. This is what they do. I need you to get me a pre-qual letter because I'm already writing an offer. And even if lenders are telling the buyer's agents, hey, I need to get, more paperwork, I need to get more information before I can tell you for sure what they're going to qualify for. There's agents that are running out there and writing offers anyway and hoping that the lender is going to be able to fix it or make them fit into that qualification for an offer that they've already written. And that's where this loan contingency becomes an issue for them, because you guys jump into escrow before the buyer is fully qualified. And the lender still has to collect paperwork and information and the documentation that they need to be able to get them approved. So for us, it's going back with the loan contingencies, going back to the very beginning as a buyer's agent and making sure that I'm sitting down with my buyers, I'm doing the consultation, I'm explaining to them the process of purchasing a home, I'm explaining to them what has to happen with their lender and why it's important that they give the paperwork. And hopefully they've already met with my lender when I'm doing the buyer consultation, because that's the way it should be. The lender should be the first appointment. The buyer consultation should be next, and then the showings should start. So what happens is if I do that properly and my lender is a good lender, which, I'm sure that the lenders that you guys are using are all good ones or you wouldn't be using them. They've collected everything they need in that first appointment and they're giving me an approval based on fact, not just opinion. And now when I sit down with the buyer and do the buyer consultation, I explain to them, this is what you're approved for. This is your buying power. This is where we're going to look. And, having all those conversations about, making sure their expectations meet their abilities. But one of those conversations is most of the time when we write an offer, we're going to have 17 days before we remove our loan contingency. And what I want you to understand is that if we have a conditional approval by day 17, and those conditions are common and normal and I feel are easily, satisfied, then we're going to remove the loan contingency. Same with the appraisal. Hey, if we do an appraisal and the property appraises, as soon as we have that appraisal back and the property appraises, we're going to remove our appraisal contingency in writing. We have to start putting them in the mode of paying attention to what it is that we're advising them to do. And from the beginning, if they're not willing to do that, and we're not explaining to them properly the process and the timelines and what's going to work and what's expected of them, then we're going to have issues with them later. And if you guys are doing things outside of what you should, which is getting them writing offers or getting offers accepted prior to getting, a very good approval or at least all of the information to your lender, then you're the one who's putting the pressure on your buyer and putting their deposit at risk. So again, with the loan contingency is just, are you in a position where the loan is in good shape and going to be funded? Not that you have unconditional approval by day 17. And the problem with this is that we put ourselves in a position where we're like, well, I'm not going to do it because I don't know if, my lender said don't do it, or because, we don't have an underwriter approval yet, or it's not 100% approved yet, so I'm not going to remove it. The problem with that is now you put yourself in a position where the seller is going to send you a notice to perform. And if you're so adamant that you're not going to remove it prior to a notice to perform, it's going to be a weird conversation with your buyer when all of a sudden you say, well, now we have to, or they're going to cancel. So you have to think about everything as how it intertwines with each other, how the leverage changes, what power the seller and the listing agent have over you as buyers. So if you don't want to lose your transactions because you're adamant that I don't want to lose their deposit, then you're going to put yourself in a position where now the sellers are in control on whether or not you move forward. Okay. Remember, with all of these contingencies that we're talking about, that not only do these contingencies lock the buyer into the transaction, meaning that they now have to complete the transaction or put their deposit at risk, but it also locks the seller in, because now what you've done is, if the seller has no contingencies, you removed any real contractual reason why the seller would have the right to cancel the agreement once you remove your contingencies. So you guys got to keep that in mind too, that it just as much as it locks a buyer in, it locks a seller in. And it gets them fully committed to making sure that they're going to close this transaction with your buyer. But if you're going to be one of those that dodges and ducks away from the listing agent and buries your head in the sand and says, I'm not removing contingencies, and you're forcing them to send notices to perform, you put yourself in a position where you're going to lose out on transactions. Okay. So that's the loan contingency, the appraisal contingency. Now, the loan and the appraisal used to be tied together, and that was a while ago, and they're not any longer. Okay. They're separate contingencies. They're not put together in the same timeline. But the appraisal contingency, if you remove your appraisal contingency, so for example, agents, and there's still a few that are out there, a tactic that buyers agents will use is that they will write an offer and remove their appraisal contingency, thinking that that's telling the listing agent and the seller that, hey, it doesn't matter what it appraises for, we're moving forward. And I get that. I understand that's what the thinking is. The idea, though, that I would offer that up as a strategy to my buyers it seems counterintuitive, right? Now, if I have an FHA buyer, and if you look over here, it's even referenced the FVAC. We talked about that a couple classes ago, but we'll bring it up again in a moment. If it's FHA buyer and the property doesn't appraise for the purchase price, their deposit is protected whether they have an appraisal contingency or not. So understanding that as a buyer's agent, if what you're saying is that I'm going to use this as a tactic, your hope is using it as a tactic to say there's no appraisal contingency, I'm going to be forced to move forward if the property doesn't appraise, is you're hoping that the listing agent doesn't understand that the FVAC negates that anyway and adds that contingency back in. So as listing agent, you have to understand that if you request for an appraisal contingency to be removed, or you get an offer with an appraisal contingency that's already been removed and it's an FHA borrower, that's meaningless. That means nothing as to the strength or weakness of that offer. And you as listing agent trying to make that counter offer, which that people are still doing, they write an offer over asking price. You want to accept it, but you're now saying if it doesn't appraise for that price, that you don't have an appraisal contingency and you're going to be stuck or you'll lose your deposit. It doesn't make sense. We all want transactions to close. Unless your job is to go and collect deposits, we all want deals to close, right? Because that's not my job as an agent. I know that's not your job as an agent, is to have my seller collect deposits or attempt to collect deposits. Our job is to help our seller get the most money they possibly can sold in the fastest amount of time possible, right? That's our job. And we know already as listing agent that we have to get appraisals, right? Everybody that's financing is going to have to get an appraisal. And if we take the strategy of, well, we're going to make them remove their appraisal contingency because they wrote an offer that was over, so that way if it doesn't appraise, well, you're out of luck. You either figure out how to pay over or you lose your deposit. Number one, those of us that have been doing this for a while, we know how difficult it can be sometimes to retain a deposit from a seller's end, right? If a buyer chooses not to sign the instructions to release the deposit, the seller has to then go fight for that deposit, however that might be, through small claims or mediation and arbitration, depending on the amount of the deposit. It puts a freeze basically on that seller. You could accept another offer and you can open another escrow, but you can't close that one until that escrow has been canceled, right? The funds have been dispersed, whether the deposit went back to the buyer or the seller ended up retaining that deposit, but you can't close escrow on another sale. So most of the time, even though a seller wants to desperately keep the deposit because the buyer may have done something to breach the agreement, and a lot of times the seller has the right to keep that deposit because the buyer has breached the agreement. But because they don't have the time or the energy to fight for that deposit, they let it go so that they can put their house back on the market and get it sold, because ultimately that's their goal. And sometimes as listing agents, that's the advice we have to give them, right? Now, we could always tell everybody, hey, you're going to, you these are your choices. You can fight for the deposit because they're not selling, and this is what's going to happen. And this is how long it may take. And during that time, you can't actually sell your house. You can open an escrow, but you can't close it. And so the timeline that you were on, is now impossible. So what would you prefer to do? Would you prefer to go fight for that deposit, or let us get you back on the market as soon as possible and start marketing those people? Because I'm going to start calling everybody else that wrote an offer, anybody else that was interested, and let them know it's back on the market. And hopefully we can get right back into escrow right away. We have to give that choice to the seller, not us. That's why I say, and I said it last week too, is sometimes we make choices for the sellers and the buyers without really including them. And I know that most of the time we're doing it out of what we believe is the best for them, but sometimes that comes up back and bites us in the ass a little bit. So always make sure that you're including the sellers and the buyers in the decisions. Give them their options, let them make a choice, and then confirm that somehow in writing, whether it be an email or text or whatever it is. Okay. Now, the appraisal contingency, if, for example, we have removed the appraisal contingency like we were talking about, and we have no appraisal contingency, okay, we still have a loan and we still have an investigation contingency, and the property doesn't appraise. I cannot use my loan contingency to cancel and keep my deposit if the only reason that I didn't get approved for the loan is because the property didn't appraise. Right? That's one step of it. We have to have the appraisal, and then we have the credit worthiness and the money and all that stuff. So part of the approval is the appraisal. If the property doesn't appraise, and that's the only reason why I can't get the loan approved, right? Because everything else, my credit is good, my money's good, my documents are all in, everything's good. I'm approved, just subject to that appraisal. If that's the case, I can't use my loan contingency to cancel. So you have to understand that you don't have that backup. You don't have that backstop of a loan contingency if you remove your appraisal contingency. So all I'm saying is that if you choose to make that a tactic, because it's not a strategy, it's a tactic to get your offer accepted, or if you're using that as a tactic as a listing agent to try to punish somebody for writing an offer that was over asking price, just know that that appraisal contingency is going to cause some issue, and the chances are you're even if I force the buyer to remove the appraisal contingency at acceptance as the listing agent, as the seller, there's still a good chance that I'm going to close escrow with that buyer at a reduced price if the property doesn't appraise. It's just what happens. It's what I see happening. It's what happens in the world out there, because especially in the market that we're in, this transition market, this changing kind of fluid market where it's this, a little bit more balanced, where sellers are open to more contingent, to concessions, and buyers are being a little bit more picky. Especially now, sellers are less likely to say, oh, well, I'm canceling because of this and going back on the market. So you have to make sure you're having that conversation with the seller so they understand where we are in a market. I think some people are still acting like we're, in that 2020, 2021 market where it was, very low interest rates and hundreds of offers on every listing. I think there's still some people, agents and sellers out there, that are living in that world. Also, with the appraisal contingency, this is one of the things that I see often. So let's say the sales price of this property is $600,000. Okay. And that's it. We're going to leave the appraisal contingency as it is, $600,000. That's it. We don't need to put anything in here. We don't need to change it. It says appraisal contingency is based on an appraised value at a minimum of the purchase price, or this is only if I'm going to change it from the purchase price. So if my purchase price was $650, I don't need to do anything if I'm okay with that appraisal. But what we could do, as opposed to let's remove your appraisal contingency from the beginning, right? Because again, that is a tactic that some listing agents are still using. But instead of that, what if we were to say, I am confident in the sales price of the list price of my property. I listed $650. I am confident that it is going to appraise for $650,000. You wrote this offer for $700,000. I don't want the contingency, the appraisal contingency, to be based on $700,000 because I don't know that it will appraise for that. So then I would say, okay, the sales price on this offer is $700,000, but I want the appraisal contingency to be $650,000. My list price. Now, if this is a conventional loan, this is fine. So what I'm saying here is that, yes, you have an appraisal contingency. I have no problem with that. But it only works if the property appraises for less than my list price, not less than your offer price. Right? So that's what this would be saying. So most people aren't writing that offer. Now, unless you are, if your new tactic is, instead of I don't have an appraisal contingency, right? So I'm a conventional borrower. I have funds. I'm going to write this offer over because I want the property. But to ensure to you that I'm willing to pay the difference between the appraised value and the offer price that I made, I'm going to make you responsible listing agent for that difference, right? So what happens is I'm going to write the offer for 700. You listed it for 650. So I'm going to say my appraisal contingency is contingent on the property coming in at a value of 650,000, not my sales price of 700. So if it comes below 650, I can then walk away or we can renegotiate the price. If it comes in over 650, then I'm responsible for that difference up to my sales price, my offer price of 700. Does that make sense? See, that's what this box and this is for. This is to say I needed to appraise for this minimum, not my sale, not the offer price, but this amount. As long as it appraises for this amount, I will pay any difference between the two. If it appraises for less than that amount, then now we have the chance to renegotiate because I can walk away because I have an appraisal contingency. Okay. I see you guys have put your hands up. I'll get to you in just a second. And there's a question in the chat also. So I'll get to you guys in a second. So again, appraisal contingency. If you're okay with the sales price, let's say that the list price is 650 and I'm offering 650, I don't need to do anything here. If I am offering over and I want to state to the seller and listing agent that I'm willing to pay the difference, then I will set a different appraised value in there. And if I'm the listing agent, I can counter that and say, hey, by the way, you offered me 7, but your appraisal contingency is going to be based on a lower price. I can do that. I can make in my counters, I can now change the way the appraisal contingency works and on what price. Okay. So you got to keep those things in mind. Understanding how all of that stuff works is important to how I protect either my buyer or my seller. Okay. Now we're going to get to the investigation of property contingency here in a second, but Tony had a question in the chat that said, I heard you can use the inspection contingency to cancel. You can, if your property doesn't appraise and you don't have an appraisal contingency and you still have your investigation contingency, yes, you can cancel. But most of the times your investigations and inspections are less time than your appraisal, and it makes it difficult a lot of times. So don't always count on that. Okay. What I wanted to do is just quickly show you guys, just so you can see in the counters. Oh, let me do this first. Let me show you something quickly in the counter offers. So we're looking at the loan contingency, right? So we have a couple counters. If we're going to change the time period, the loan contingency removed within blank days of acceptance. Okay, that's the loan contingency. Appraisal contingency, if changing the time period, appraisal contingency to be removed within blank days, whatever you do. I suggest you don't go less than 10. 12, I think, is acceptable. And what we're going to add in that counter is that the buyer is going to give us a complete copy of the appraisal at the time they remove their contingency. You could see the extra verbiage in there. The reason for that is because the buyer is not required to provide you a copy of the appraisal unless the property doesn't appraise and they're renegotiating the price, or if it's an FHA or VA purchase. If it's FHA or VA, even if the property appraises, they are required to give you a copy of the appraisal. Now, conventional is not, so we have to ask them for it, and we make that part of the counter so that they can't say no, right? So we do that as part of a counter. And I always make this, I give this advice to agents all the time. In your counters, please ask for a completed copy of the appraisal. Please ask for a completed copy of the appraisal. Make sure that you're doing that in your counter offers, because unless it's FHA, you're not required to do it. And most listing agents don't even know that they're required, or buyer's agents don't know that they're required to provide the appraisal when they are FHA or VA. Okay. So again, if we're removing it with the acceptance, buyer agrees the appraisal contingency is removed with the acceptance offer form CR attached to sign and return with this counter. Even though we're saying, I always add the contingency removal in there if that's what you're going to do as listing agent to remove it. If we're changing the appraisal value, like we talked about before with checking that box, appraisal contingency is based on an appraised value of the original list price or whatever it is to be removed within 12 days of acceptance and a completed copy of the appraisal to be provided to seller at that time. So you see, anytime I have an appraisal in, whether I'm shortening the time periods or changing the appraisal value, I'm asking for a completed copy of that. Okay. Let's see. Let me get to Jesus said I answered his question. Tony, I hope you answered yours. Alba, you were first. Go ahead.
Hi, Kyle. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's say that sellers want to put their property on the market and they already did an appraisal on their property. They paid for it. But I am doing my CMA and I see that the property can possibly be listed for a little bit more than what it appraised for. Um, can I list it at the appraised value of what the appraiser suggests, or should I list it at the price that I see the comparables?
Okay, so it's a little bit of that's a little tricky, that situation, because sometimes those when you hire an appraiser to do an appraisal and it's not part of a loan, right? They're not an appraiser that's hired by the lender to go appraise the value based on the loan. Sometimes those values are a little squishy, right? I mean, there's been a history of those independent appraisals that get done where the value is sometimes too little and sometimes too high. So a lot of times they fit right in, but it has been like they're too high or too low, because we don't know the the qualifications of that appraisal. We don't know if that appraiser works in this area, all kinds of things, right? So number one, I would look at the appraisal and see which comparables they used as part of the appraisal and see if they were older comparables or if they're comparables that you don't see. Check title, check MLS. I would double check those to see if they're the same comparables. And if they're not, and these are different comparables and better ones, then go with your value. But you do have to disclose you have that appraisal now to any buyers. I would never suggest that a seller get an appraisal prior to listing their property and marketing it, because now I have to share that appraisal with any buyers that come in. And now I'm going to have an issue, because if I list it for more than the appraised value and they write an offer at more than the appraised value, and then as part of my disclosures, I go, oh, by the way, here's an appraisal, they're probably going to be not too happy about the value that they submitted their offer for. Does that make sense? So keep in mind that, that's tricky. They shouldn't do that. I would suggest, if you feel comfortable and confident that the comparables you have would dictate a higher price than appraisal, go for it, and then just have that information ready so you can share it. I would keep those comps, share them with any buyer's agents that you have to share that appraisal with. Okay, so you can back up your pricing. Edgar, go ahead. You're next.
So when you change out the appraisal value from minimal purchase, and you say you have so you listed it at 650, you get an offer at 700, you change it like the way you did right there to 650, you change it. How do you lock them in into coming in with the difference? I don't remember you saying that, or do they still have a way out after that with their loan?
Well, look, here's the thing. Again, keep in mind, let's going back to removing the appraisal contingency, right? If it appraises for more than the 650 and then they refuse, like let's say it appraises for 675. So the offer was at 700, it appraises at 675. So there's an appraisal gap of $25,000. If they then refuse to make up that appraisal gap, even though they agreed to this contract, they can't use their appraisal contingency to cancel. So their deposit would be in jeopardy. It would then be up to me to decide if I want to fight for their deposit or not in order to force them into that. Okay. Or there could be some other changes I could make. I could say, okay, buyer, you don't want to make up this appraisal gap of 25,000. You want me to reduce the price to 675, even though you offered 700. I will do that, but I won't pay any of the concessions that I had agreed to before. Let's say I was going to pay him $10,000 in closing costs. I won't pay that. Or I won't pay that, and I won't pay your buyer's agent's compensation. You're going to be responsible for that. Right? Like there's some other options in the negotiating that I can do. So I could say, sure, we'll reduce the price, but I'm also now going to take away the credits that I gave you, or take away the compensation that you asked me to pay on your behalf. If that's the case, if you agree to that, then we'll move forward at the 675. If not, you either pay the 25,000 and cancel and risk losing your deposit. There's nothing else that forces. It's not like there's nothing that they're gonna hand them a piece of paper and they're gonna be like, oh, I guess I have to give you the money. No, it's gonna be a negotiation, and they're gonna lose their deposit or put their deposit at risk if they choose not to honor the contract that they had agreed to. That's all. But there's nothing really that you could do that says you're forced to. Jesus, go ahead. Let me unmute you there. Go ahead.
And you mentioned once again, once anything is open to negotiations, everything is open to negotiation.
Absolutely.
Whether it was credit or appraisal, now we can negotiate even the commission or concessions for repairs.
Everything. Once, so this is our document, right? We get through this whole purchase agreement. We do counter offers. We do the whole thing, and we finally agree on these are the terms that we're going to buy, that we're going to abide by through this transaction. Once something comes up, even with repairs, right? Because the property is sold as is, per disclosures, per inspections. There's nothing that obligates the seller to make any repairs. Nothing. Zero. So for an example, anything I negotiate, whether it be the appraised value or changing the type of loan, right? Changing the type of loan, because we'll get to that as we get into the detail paragraphs of the loan, like in 8A and all those things. When we get to those paragraphs, we're going to get to the point where we see like, hey, I can't change my financing without getting the approval of the seller, right? I don't have the right to do that. If I do that, my loan contingency no longer protects me. So for example, if I'm the buyer and I say, okay, well, I have to go from conventional to FHA because the rate or whatever the reasoning is, because it happens, right? So I send you an amendment saying seller agrees for buyer to change financing from conventional to FHA. But in this offer, I was paying $5,000 in closing costs and I was paying 2% of the purchase price to the buyer's agent. I could say, we'll allow you to change your financing, but now we're no longer paying the closing costs, or now we're no longer paying the compensation to the buyer's broker. All of those things happen. So again, even with an extension, I need an extension of time on my loan or appraisal contingency or my investigation. I need an extension because I'm doing these things or that. I go, sure, I'll grant you the extension, but now I'm only paying 1% to your buyer's agent instead of 2%. You have to understand as a buyer's agent that and that's why I talked to you guys about strength of offer and making sure that your buyer understands everything that you're going into and doing the investigations, doing all that stuff. And even for you with your no matter what, how perfect your offer is, no matter what, you guys have to understand that your compensation is not guaranteed 100%. The only way it's guaranteed 100% is that your buyer is paying it. Right? Anything else that happens. So for example, in that case, like we're talking about things being negotiated, if we do say I'll reduce the price, but I'm not paying compensation, now not only do you have to go back to your buyer and say, okay, buyer, are you going to pay the difference between that 1% now that they reduced to 2%? Are you going to pay that? And if you are okay with them not paying it, then you've now got to modify your buy. There's all kinds of things that go into it. So I know I'm getting off track a little bit, but you guys just have to understand you can't, because I've had agents that tell me this is not right, it's not fair, they're changing my compensation. What did you do? I asked for an extension. Okay, were you past the time period? Were you before the time period? Because those extensions and negotiations make difference. They make a difference too, right? If, for example, I know that I'm not going to be able to remove my contingency in time, and I know that early, and if I ask ahead of time, it's less likely when I ask for that extension ahead of time that this listing agent and the seller are going to be punitive and remove things as part of that. But if I wait and dodge them and they have to wait for their calls and then remove my contingencies or ask for an extension, then they're going to be mad, right? I wait till it's day 20 instead of day 17. And all of a sudden I go, oh, I need an extension. That's when listing agents and sellers get upset. And that's when they become punitive. And that's when they renegotiate commissions and concessions and things like that to grant extensions. So again, it's also too is how do I choose to do the business? I know you all know, those of you guys that have done this for any period of time, okay? Any of you that have done this for any period of time, you know when you're not going to feel comfortable and confident removing loans and appraisal. You know that if I shorten my appraisal contingency or got my appraisal contingency shortened by the listing agent and I haven't gotten the appraisal done yet, I know that early. That's the one thing that's like one of my pet peeves is like I'll have an agent come to me and say, oh, our appraisal contingency is up today and the guy's not going to go do the appraisal till tomorrow. You knew prior to today that the appraisal wasn't going to be done today. And you are now just barely asking for extensions or what should we do? That's just common sense. If I know, if I'm at day 7 or 8 and that appraisal hasn't been done yet, I'm not going to have my appraisal done by day 10. I know it. It's a guarantee not happening. So what should I do at that moment? Listing agent, hey, whatever the issue was, there was a mix up because it happens. Sometimes it's not just like, oh, we're lazy and didn't do an appraisal got sick or an appraiser who was scheduled couldn't do it. And now there's nobody else available and time periods and all the kinds of things, right? Like it takes us a while to get an appraiser out there. I get it. But the minute that first appraisal goes south, right, that the guy can't show up, that should be the cue for me to say, hey, listing agent, our first appraiser got sick or couldn't make the appraisal. Now they're trying to find somebody else. We're scrambling. I don't know if we're going to get it done by the 10th. Can I get 3 or 4 more days on an extension? That's how you communicate. But what we do is we just go, oh, well, it didn't happen. And then it's the day of, and the listing agent is calling you and saying, hey, you guys haven't done your appraisal and your appraisal contingency is up today. And then you're like, oh, can I get an extension? Now they're mad at you because it seems like you knew this. Why didn't you tell me? So it's like we have to start taking responsibility too as buyer's agents that we're being proactive and doing the things we're supposed to do instead of pointing the finger at the listing agents being mean to me. Do your job too, guys. And if I am a listing agent, guess what? I need to be on top of my time periods also. I know that you guys have a lot of transactions, but you know that you're working multiple transactions, a lot of you, but you have to still give service to your seller. And if I countered for a 10-day appraisal contingency and we're on day 8 or 9 and I haven't gotten even the phone call of it's being scheduled, I'm going to call the listing agent or the buyer's agent. I'm going to be like, hey, you guys haven't done your appraisal. I'm sending a notice to perform right now. Right? I'm going to be the one that's going to force them to request the extension, but I'm going to do it early. You know what I mean? Like we also had like both sides. We have to take a little responsibility for the stuff that we do. So a lot of times listing agents are very laissez-faire and they're hands off and they ignore it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's day 14. They haven't removed their contingency. Now I'm mad. And buyers agents are like, I'm going to hide from everybody. It's day 14 and we haven't finished the contingency yet. It's just take some responsibility. That's it. Just be accountable for what you're doing and be proactive on what you're doing. Yeah, sometimes tenants doesn't allow their appraiser in. Again, then that becomes a seller's issue too, right? You as listing agent and seller, you have to be also, hey, I get it. My tenant's being a problem. Yeah, we're going to give you more time. The thing that happens though is that we have those conversations, listing agents, buyers agents, we have those conversations and we don't put them in writing. We don't memorialize it. We just say, listen, don't worry about it. We're not going to do anything. We give you time. We give you time. We give you time until we don't. And then all of a sudden there's a notice to perform. So make sure no matter how cool the listing agent is, how good you guys are getting along, put everything in writing. Hey, here's the extension of time, right? I'm giving you the extension of time because the tenants won't let us in. Great. There should be no reason why a listing agent won't sign it. But again, it's all being communicating and doing things the right way. And we always choose to take shortcuts. And shortcuts are, well, I talked to them and they said they're going to be cool about it. Go ahead, Jesus.
Kyle, as good listing agents that we are, when it's time to remove the buyer, remove all the contingencies, it is correct to send them a notice to buyer to perform before or the time is due, correct? 3 days before the time is due.
I mean, if you're really going to be on it as a listing agent, you could send it 2 days prior. So for low, like let's just say that we're leaving these contingencies as they are, 17 days, all of them, right? On day 15, I can send them a notice to perform. Say, hey, your contingency's up on this day. Here you go. So yeah, I mean, if you're really going to be on it, it doesn't. Again, notices to perform don't mean that you guys have to cancel. It gives you the right to, doesn't mean you have to. But if I have something in writing that says, hey, I already gave you a notice to perform day 17, we're not screwing around because I want to make sure that we stay on time. So yeah, if you're really going to be on it, send it 2 days prior. If not, you can wait until they don't perform on day 17. They haven't done it, or day 18. Here you go. You got 2 more days, and that's all I'm giving you. And then we're moving on. It works either way. You just can't send it more than 2 days prior to. Okay. All right. So let's move on quickly here. All right. Investigation of property. Again, make sure that whatever that time period is, that you guys are on it, that you're making sure that you're hiring the home inspector as soon as possible, scheduled as soon as possible, get all that stuff taken care of. Because again, just like we talked about, we don't want to be in a position where we're having to negotiate extensions because now we're opening up everything else for investigations. Now, if you're going to counter to shorten the time periods, I get it, but make it make sense. Okay, make it make sense. And if I'm going to do that, if I'm going to shorten any of these, like from appraisal down, right? Appraisal, investigation, this is informational access to property. If I don't address that, even if the buyer, let's say that the buyer's appraisal contingency was 12, the investigation was 7, we're at day 12, they've removed all their contingencies, and then they say, hey, we still want to go take a look at the property. And then what happens is listing agents and sellers go, no, they've already removed all their contingencies. You can't have access. But we didn't address this in the counter. So they still have 17-day informational access. You can't deny them. You can't deny them access to the property until that day 17 comes and goes. So keep in mind, even if all the contingencies are removed, they still have access. It's not a contingency, but they have a right to the property. It does not give them cancellation rights, but it does give them access to the property, and you can't stop them from having access. So if, as soon as we'll get to your questions, type it in the chat, please, because I'm running out of time and I want to get through this. So just go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'll jump on it when I can. So just keep in mind, if I'm going to shorten time periods where they're going to do contingencies where they have to have access, I got to shorten that informational access. So whatever your longest contingency is for access, which is generally the appraisal, right? So if my appraisal is 12 days, then I'm going to make this informational access 12 days. Okay. So it doesn't have to match the investigation. It just has to match the informational access, has to match however the longest period of time that they need access to the property. Make sense? One thing I will tell you about investigation of property. Investigation of property is not just the home inspection. It's any of the investigation due diligence that you want to do with the city. It's any other kind of reports that you may want, right? So you've got your home inspection. Maybe you want to do a termite. You want to find out if I can build an ADU, so you have to go to the city. You want to look at permits because something looks like a little funky, right? All of that stuff has to get done in that period of time. So if you agree to a 7-day investigation of property contingency, that's not just the home inspection. That's you going to the city to look at permits. That's you having a termite come out. That's you having a surveyor come out. That's you finding out from the city if you can build your ADU. Okay. The buyer inspection. So in the chat, somebody put, what's the form for all the list of the possible inspections? There's a form called buyer inspection elections, the BIE. You could have them fill that out and have them choose from the beginning the inspections that they want to do. Good question. So keep in mind that when you get that shortened period of time, that's you doing all the legwork, right? Now, there is a separate contingency for review of the seller's documents. That's different. Now, anything that the seller makes as a disclosure, so your NHD, the lead-based paint, the SPQ, the prelim has its own section. Any of those things, the HOA disclosures, leased or liened items, all of those things are separate from this investigation of property. They have their own timelines. Okay. So you have to keep in mind that those things are going to offset. So if I'm a buyer's agent, listing agent, and I'm countering to shorten investigation, and I'm countering to shorten this informational access, then I should be shortening all of these right here. Right. But if I do that, I also have to be prepared to deliver everything to the buyer in a time that allows them to have the time to review it. So if I make all of these 7 days, sans insurance, but the property, the review of the documents, the investigation of the property, the HOA, that's the common interest disclosures, leased or liened items, right? The solar panels or water softener or anything else that may be attached, right? The hero loans that are there for whatever you did. All of that stuff, I have to have all that information and provide it to them immediately if I'm going to give them 7 days to do all their investigations and really say, yes, I'm in, and remove their contingencies. So when we're looking at stuff like leased or liened items or common interest disclosures, right? That's the HOA stuff. If you have the ability to get all of those documents prior to marketing the property, right? Prior to listing it, you could, some HOAs will allow the owners to order all of the documents that they need, the CC&Rs, the minutes, the finances of the HOA. They could get that stuff. Some of them can get that stuff. Some of them can't. Same with the leased or liened items. If you can get the information that's necessary to disclose to the buyers what they have to do in order to take on that stuff, then do it prior to, just like we talked about with the pre-sale inspections, right? Pre-sales, the city pre-sale. That's one of the documents that the seller has to deliver. So if the seller has to deliver a pre-sale and you're telling me that the review of documents is up in 7 or 10 days, and I haven't even ordered the city pre-sale inspection, how can they possibly remove that contingency? So you guys have to keep all that stuff in mind. All those time periods are tied together. Okay. All that stuff is tied together. I think it's 11:52 right now. Try to think if I want to continue on, or we should move. You know what? I'm just going to stop and we'll start with the COP and the stuff like that next Thursday. So I'll give you guys an opportunity to ask some questions right now, since we got to that point. So if you have anything that either we talked about and was unclear, some things that we didn't talk about yet, and you have questions on, don't hesitate. You can get there. I think, Melissa in the chat was asking about the buyer's inspections. So there is a form, buyer inspection elections. The buyer inspection advisory is a little different than that. That's just telling them that they have the right to do those things. It doesn't tell them what inspections they can do. So if you guys take a look at your zip forms and look for the buyer inspection elections, you can see the list of forms, the list of inspections and things that are on there. Anything else from you guys? I apologize for the bumpy start at the beginning, but I'm glad you were all here. Again, going through this, it's just trying to make sure that we're covering all the bases. So I know this class is moving a little slower than sometimes our others do, but I want to spend time on these things, make sure I'm showing you stuff that is necessary, any documents that may go with the, with what we're talking about. So if you guys missed any of it, it'll be on YouTube later today. You could go back and look if you haven't been in part of the other 3 classes, and you want to kind of tie this together. All 3 of those are on YouTube too. You guys can always email me if you need anything. I'm available to you. I appreciate you guys being here. Oops, somebody put their hand. Jesus, you put up your hand again? What's going on, Jesus?
Good things. Melissa has a question, and I have a really just to confirm. So when the selling agent shortens their contingencies to 10 days, all the contingencies and the access to the property is just 10 days, correct?
Well, no, it depends. Like I said, if you're talking about if somebody puts investigation of property, right? So you're talking about 3L3 and they put
Yes.
on 3L3, it's 10 days. It
Mhm.
doesn't change their access to the property, the amount of time they have access to the property. It doesn't change how much time they have to review the seller's documents. It doesn't change how much time they have to remove to review the prelim, or to review the disclosures from the HOA, or to review the lease or lien items that property might have. What it does shorten is their professional home inspection, any other inspections that they want to pay for and do on the property, and their information that they get from the city. That's the only thing that's limited by that timeline.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then Jenny in chat, can you refresh my memory? How does the buyer cancel the BRBC? There is a form called the COBR, cancellation of buyer representation. So what the buyer would have to do is they would have to get in contact with their agent that they send the BRBC with, tell them they would like to cancel, and please send me a cancellation of my buyer representation. If it is a non-exclusive buyer representation, the day they sign the COBR, the buyer representation is canceled. If it is an exclusive buyer representation, then the day they sign the COBR, it will be 30 days from that date that the representation agreement will be canceled. Okay, so hopefully that was clear. So just whatever buyer wants to cancel, they request that from their agent. The agent can't deny cancellation. Okay, it's not like a listing agreement where we can fight back and say, no, we're not canceling. The BRBC, if you request the cancellation, they have to cancel. Okay. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. I like that you spend time with me every hour and listen to me ramble on and on and on about the contract. So thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you guys again. Go out there and be safe and be productive.